Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the Buckeye Extra football podcast. It's Sunday, September 22nd. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz, Rob Oller. We're here to break down Ohio State's 49-14 rout of Marshall. That wraps up the non-conference slate. Drum roll, the Buckeyes went 3-0 against Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. Now we'll get to see them in Big Ten play at Michigan State next week. But let's put a bow on the non-conference slate and talk a little bit about what we saw against Marshall.
Well, I think you saw for the first time a little bit of vulnerability on defense. The Tyreek Williams, the defensive tackle, didn't play, and I thought that showed a little bit. Ryan Day said it was a mixed bag. The interior of the defensive line, Marshall scored touchdowns on the first and last possession of the first half, and that's the first time Ohio State, I think it's the first time an opponent had gotten even inside the Ohio State 30 all year, let alone scoring. So that was a little bit of a rude awakening. They really buckled down in the second half. And what we've seen over the years is that teams, even overmatched teams, can sometimes have success on that first drive because they script things, they show different looks than they showed on tape. Jordan Hancock referenced that yesterday. And then they make the adjustments and tighten things up. And that's pretty much what happened. But the offense was spectacular.
Yeah, I think the big picture, I was thinking about this after the game, is that what can opponents learn from these three games as much as what can Ohio State learn from these three games? I mean, are there any vulnerabilities? I think what we saw against Marshall was maybe a vulnerability to the air raid, which, Ohio State's done pretty well against in the past. Those air raid offenses haven't hurt them too much. But if there's a vulnerability, forget the 7-step drop, 5-step, 7-step drop, just get it out of your hand quick. Slants, quick hitters, and that kind of opens things up to the run. The quarterback, as Ryan Day said in his post-game press conference, the quarterback gives you that extra man, that extra runner, and you have to make a choice as an offense. Okay, you're going to get some yards, but you're going to get your quarterback beat up. Well, Marshall was willing to do that. He ended up, cramping up. Now, I don't think that's because he was getting hit, probably the heat. But again, I think it'll be interesting to see what opponents take away from, especially the Marshall game.
I think you could also look at the interior of Ohio State's defensive line, and certainly look at that as an issue because they did not have Tyreek Williams, and I thought they missed him. I mean, Marshall was able to take advantage of a couple things where they had Stoner, their quarterback, keep the ball and find some gaps in the middle of the defense. Maybe Tyreek Williams closes those faster than Hero Kanu or Tywone Malone or Caden McDonald, who were largely the guys sort of rotating in his place. To me, that looked like maybe an issue. And we don't know when Tyreek Williams is going to return. Ryan Day only described him as day-to-day. Did not sound like his return was going to be imminent, but I mean, I guess he could be back against Michigan State. It's hard to know that much of a substantial update on that front, but that looked like a weakness potentially.
And then, of course, the special teams were pretty much a disaster yesterday. For Jaden Fielding, 3 straight hooks out of bounds on kickoffs. I don't think I've ever seen that 3 in a row. And Brandon Innes muffed the punt that Marshall recovered. Fortunately for Ohio State, there was a penalty on Marshall that nullified that recovery. We thought these special teams problems had been solved with the departure of Parker Fleming, but that was not a great sign. That's easily correctable. I mean, maybe there was something physical with Jaden Fielding. I mean, they made some kind of allusion to some kind of, maybe he had a hip issue or something. I might have missed that, but if there's a physical thing, that certainly explains it. If it's a mental thing and he's kind of like got the yips, then they better get that solved because they can't be giving teams the ball at the 35 all the time. Marshall's second touchdown drive was started at the 35, and so they only had to go 65 yards. And since they scored with 6 seconds to go, that time and that yardage mattered.
I was just going to say Fielding's taken all the heat legitimately, but in a way, the bigger issue maybe not the bigger issue, but the more damaging thing, again, they got out of it, was the Innis fumble. I mean, starting on the 35 is one thing. Fumbling in your own territory where the other team, almost took it in, that's a bigger issue. And then we forgot Innis also slipped on what looked like it would have been a big return. I thought he'd have gotten some decent yardage on that, and he slipped and went down. So, we talked about this in the press box during the game. There is nuance to this with Parker Fleming and the problems of the past were just systematic, maybe too many men on the field, delay of game. This was individual responsibility. This was a guy muffing a punt. This was a kicker kicking it out of bounds. It still falls on the special teams coaching, but not, they kind of just have to shrug and say, well, the guys need to just they just need to do the job. But the Innis thing was a little more perplexing because it wasn't a good decision. It wasn't just a muff punt. It went off his fingertips. He kind of crouched. You're willing to live with those things because he does show some potential. And they switched him out. Ballard, was essentially benched from kickoff return, and Innis took over. So, they have faith in Innis, but you just don't want to see that. And that's what any coach, and Ryan Day especially, maybe, you cannot turn the ball over on special teams.
I think there is an important distinction to make, as Robbie kind of alluded to a little bit. The issues Ohio State had yesterday with special teams were largely performance-driven. A player not fielding the punt correctly, another kicking the ball out of bounds. What really plagued Ohio State in recent years when Parker Fleming was in charge of that unit was just the procedural stuff. They would play in the Cotton Bowl and there'd be a delay of game on a punt, or they would line up in the wrong formation, or they would call for a punt and Jesse Mirko thought it was a fake punt. He takes off running. You had so many of those issues. I think what Ohio State showed yesterday is probably more correctable. I would venture to guess. We'll see with Brandon Innis as far as how he fields stuff moving forward, but that certainly they need to. I mean, that was going to give Marshall the ball at the 16-yard line. That could have made things a lot more interesting there in the second quarter if that is not negated by a legal formation that Marshall had.
And that was Ohio State was only leading 14-7 at that point. And so if Marshall gets the ball and they score, you got a tie game, and all of a sudden the murmurs in the stadium get louder and it changes the game. So there's no question. But on the flip side, you have to also appreciate what that offense did. And even if it had been 14-14, and maybe it was just a matter of time before Ohio State would have just put down the hammer. I mean, they were so explosive yesterday. And you look at, you got Donovan Jackson back on the offensive line, and that offensive line dominated. Again, it's Marshall, and no discredit to Marshall. They're not a Big Ten team. And so the tests still await. But it was an encouraging performance because that offensive line did a really good job, except for Josh Fryer getting beat on a sack. They pass protected well, and they run block very well.
I think one encouraging thing for Ohio State, as far as its offense goes, is that explosiveness that they showed. It was not just one guy. It was right. Emeka Egbuka starts it out with a tunnel screen that goes 68 yards. Quinshon Judkins has an 86-yard run. Travion Henderson has a 50 or 40-yard run. Jeremiah Smith takes a slant 53 yards for a touchdown. Last year, they were explosive at times. It was the occasional Travion Henderson big hit or Marvin Harrison Jr. making a big play. It felt at times last year they were so dependent on Marvin to carry them on offense that this year they have a sort of a larger cast of playmakers they can go to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This was what was expected, right? I mean, these guys, this offense these guys were supposed to do what they're doing now. I think, I'm a little interested by the tight end position and what's going on there. It does not seem, I'm not sure you say that's a weakness, especially after what we saw yesterday. They're so explosive. But again, it was Marshall. When you get up against a Penn State, a Michigan, we got to throw Michigan in there. I think their defense is pretty legit. Is a tight end position, is that an area they really need to shore up? I mean, they're rotating guys, but no one seems to be totally getting the job done. Then again, when you got Egbuka and when you got these guys that can take you to the house, Why throw to the tight end?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think you're right about the tight end situation. G. Scott, I don't think had a ball thrown his way yesterday. Will Kazmarek had a pass that was a little bit high that he didn't catch. Jelani Thurman had a ball that was a little behind him that he didn't catch, and that he could have gone for a long way if he had caught that ball. And it looked like after the play there was some discussion about whether he'd run the right route or what. There was something. It was a timing issue on that play. And again, he's a young player. He's a sophomore, but he's got so much potential that you hope he's not one of these guys that becomes that guy, the guy who has potential and doesn't cash in on it. And now you're getting to the point, sophomore year, you better start to show it. And I think he could be a really good player. They certainly think he could be a really good player. But, they're not going to get a lot of opportunities because, as you said, Rob, why throw to the tight end as much as they did with Cade Stover last year? There's no reason to. You've got, the best freshman receiver in the country and one of the best receivers, period, in the country, and Jeremiah Smith. You've got Luka, who does everything well, and Carnell Tate, who gets lost in the mix a little bit, but is obviously an extremely talented guy. I think Ennis is in that category too, as a fourth guy. And then those running backs. I mean, the way that Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson ran yesterday, boy, they ran hard. They ran with vision. They plowed guys. Quinshon Judkins on its first run, I think, stiff-armed a guy, I think, back to West Virginia. I mean, they ran really, really well. And that line was opening big holes.
I think the tight end is a weak spot as far as its role in the passing game, at least. I think it's been okay run blocking, but you just do not have anybody who I think is a great threat. And I don't have numbers in front of me on this, but their ability to run 12 personnel, which is something they've done a lot over the years, where they feature two tight ends, is going to be probably limited in some fashion just by the ability of these guys to catch balls. But it's sort of a first world problem a little bit because you have such a talented cast of playmakers elsewhere, receiver and at running back, that I don't know if it's truly an essential problem for them to figure out. But you would like them to be a little more of a threat, at least in some short-term yardage. And it feels like in some of those third and shorts or second and shorts, they haven't really been able to connect with some of those guys.
I agree, not to belabor it, but I don't think they have to be great at tight end because the offense just has so many weapons. But it does give you that extra, option that you may need in a big game. Right. You don't want it to be a weak, like Joey said, I'm not sure it's a weak point, but it's a weak point in the passing game.
It's worth monitoring. I think that's sort of where I'm.
Yeah, I just think if you take all the pieces they have now and you add a tight end, and again, I don't think you need some future NFL, Hall of Famer at tight end. You just need a guy that can catch the ball. And as Bill already alluded to, you had two guys that did not catch the ball yesterday. So you play routinely, right?
I think you wanted somebody you wanted somebody to be maybe more of a Luke Farrell and a Cade Stover, because I don't know if they have a Mackey Ward finalist right there right now. But Luke Farrell was somebody who was a day 3 draft pick. They were able to use him in that Sugar Bowl win over Clemson in the red zone. I mean, somebody of that, I think, is what you wanted, where they could be a reliable pass catcher. But Cade Stover was effectively their second read last year from McCord a lot of times. If Barber wasn't open, he's going to Cade Stover. I don't think they have a tight end quite like that where he's going to be the number 2 option, but they need somebody who can at least be a dependable option. And just the timing doesn't seem in sync.
But last thing I want to say on that is I don't know where Chip Kelly is with playing the tight end. Like, is Chip Kelly as the tight end always been a huge part of Chip Kelly's offense? I mean, remember, Chip Kelly's calling the plays. Chip Kelly's running the show. Maybe the tight end is like the 4th, 5th option in his offense, just historically. I haven't really researched that, and that could be part of it too. He doesn't rely on the tight end.
Well, the tight end Ohio State traditionally has been more of a blocker than a receiver, and they have blocked well. I mean, it was telling that on Will Howard's 1-yard sneak, I think it was at 4th down. I can't remember if it was 4th down or not, but they brought in the robust T. Woody Hayes was smiling from above. And, I think they had, 18 tight ends out there and just, so I think the tight ends are giving them what they need right now. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it'd be nice it's a luxury. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a luxury given what they've got, but you can never have too many weapons, right? And so, but I still thought that the main takeaway from yesterday offensively was other than the explosiveness, was the way the offensive line looked with Donovan Jackson there. I thought it was interesting that Tegra Shabola and Austin Saravel alternated. Shabola played more, but they did give Saravel some time at right guard. I thought Josh Simmons played well. I thought I noticed him a couple times opening up some big holes. So if that offensive line, which we all agree is the biggest question on the team, if that becomes a strength, then this offense is a juggernaut.
Yeah, they were certainly effective
G?
running that left side.
What?
I said juggernaut with 2 G's. That's an inside joke. A former beat writer who will remain nameless used to always say juggernaut with 2 G's.
Okay. Well, the accent just gave it away.
I'm amazed at, yeah, okay. Anyhow, sorry about that. Well,
no, that's
what are we talking about? Are we talking about,
Well, how about this? Joey and I talked yesterday in the press box about, are Judkins and Henderson the best duo Ohio State's ever had? And I think the answer is yes. At one time. I mean, now they've had some seniors who were great and freshmen that were going to be great. But I don't know that they've had two guys at once.
I think it's a different game. You had Archie and you had Pete Johnson at the same time.
Tailback, fullback.
I just think it's a different era. So to say it's the best 2 running backs ever, I'm not sure you say that. But by today's, the way you expect the running game to go, yeah. I mean, I think they're the best in the nation at this moment. Now, again, I don't know every team, so there could be a pair out there that are, incredible. But this is a pretty good pair.
I mean, Judkins just is a beast. I mean, he can run through the tackles, the vision. And I thought TreVeyon Henderson showed a lot of vision yesterday on a couple of his runs.
He had that one nice play where it was blocked. He, got stopped in the backfield. There was nothing there, and he broke it left.
Yep.
And really made a nice play out of that. I want to touch on something else too, because in Ryan Day's, we've done this long enough that when a coach starts saying the same thing and emphasizing, when you ask a question and he kind of takes it a different direction and answers it the way he wants to answer it, that tells you something. And what he's been saying lately is this is such an unselfish team that no one cares who gets the credit. So he's trying to pump up his team, because what you've got are some interesting situations. You got TreVeyon Henderson, who is like, a leader on the team, totally respected. And now you've got Quinshon Judkins kind of not taking over, because Henderson's still good, but getting a lot of the love. You've got the same thing, G. Scott. Now, G. Scott, his first year kind of starting, but he's a role model on the team. He's kind of a leader. So, I don't know the dynamic. I'm not trying to create something here. I just don't know the dynamic inside that locker room. Yes, guys are unselfish, the brotherhood, all that, but all guys also like to play and they like to be stars. And it's not something to keep an eye on. I just noticed that when a coach talks so much about no one cares if they get the credit, he's sending a message to his players, not just to the media. And I don't think he's concerned that there could be, chemistry issues. I don't sense that on this team. But I just find it interesting that when you've been the guy and you're not the guy anymore, what's that do to the team?
Well, I think what he was saying is that he's impressed with how they've handled it. And because it's very easy for TreVeyon Henderson to kind of not embrace Quinshon Judkins. I mean, let's face it, every running back wants to be the guy, as you said. But I think TreVeyon understands, first of all, he's been hurt most of his career, had injuries most years of his career, and this will keep him fresh as well as Quinshon fresh. So it's better off in the long run. And the other thing is, why carry the ball 25 times a game at Ohio State when all that's going to do is devalue you as an NFL running back? Right. If you're running 12 times a game instead of 25, then the NFL will say the whole tread on your tire thing. That's a huge knock on running backs. They take such a pounding that you don't want them to have that kind of thing. And so I think Day is just impressed that his players have that mentality, that they have the maturity to understand that, okay, maybe TreVeyon could have run for 200 yards yesterday against Marshall's defense, but what's the point? What's the point? The point is to win a championship and to keep yourself healthy. And I think they generally like each other. I mean, there's that too. I think the fact that they put these guys, Ohio State and probably most programs, but certainly at Ohio State, they put these guys to the ringer. And what that does in their offseason conditioning and all that, it creates a bond. It's almost an us against them kind of thing. It's like they've gone through hell together, and now they're truly a team. There's certainly a method to I don't say madness, but the method to the method. And so you get to this point, and you can get the sense this is a united team. This is a motivated team. And look, losing to Michigan 3 straight years leaves scars.
I have a theory on Travion and Quinshon because it was interesting their carry breakdown yesterday. Quinshon had 14 carries. Travion had 6. So it was a lot heavier with Quinshon. Travion this year is averaging 8 carries per game. He averaged 15 per game last year. So part of that is due to just the nature of these games being blowout wins. But he certainly had a more scaled back workload. But it might make him a more effective running back because he's really popped on some big runs. And I just wonder, is he maybe a relief pitcher who, by throwing fewer pitches, allows him to throw harder? Because you see some of those guys in baseball where they end up being relievers because they throw 100 miles per hour. But you could do that as a starter throwing 6 innings. You can do that for 1 innings as a 8th, 9th inning guy. And that may be what Travion does best for them. He's averaging 8.6 yards per carry right now. Had the big 40-yard run, had a couple others where he was able to cut back. I mean, he just looks good when he's not maybe having the 15 yards a game, 15 carries a game sort of load. It might allow them to actually be more effective running backs moving forward, especially in the case of Travion.
Sounds like a story, Joey. Get on it.
They won't play through.
I'm assigning. I'm now your editor. I'm assigning stories. We'll see how that plays out. But that is a pretty good insight there. That I always thought they're Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside, but Judkins can do both. And Henderson again. Listen. They're really good. They've got a really good 1-2 punch. And
let's not forget about James Peoples, who looks really good too. The freshman, he looks really good. I mean,
sure. I mean, that's
he'll be the guy, right? Presumably,
pair and a spare. He's the spare right now, but he's not. He's very good. So we'll see. And, these guys get nicked up. I mean, they're going to get in Big Ten, and somebody's going to get nicked up. Whether it's sitting out a half, a couple plays, a game or more. It's going to happen. They're running backs, and it's a tough sport. So People's, at the ready. What do we have? What else do we have?
Well, probably should move on to the Big Ten. Ohio State, starting Big Ten play next week at Michigan State. Let's kind of give the lay of the land as we see it with the Big Ten. Obviously, the marquee game yesterday was Michigan prevailing somehow against USC. That was
Michigan. They're playing Michigan ball. They got a good defense. They run the ball. They run hard. They are tough in the trenches. They have no passing game, which
none.
Would bite them. But I mean, the teams in the 1970s had no passing game either, and it was a different game. But I'm not saying Michigan is great. It's just that win surprised me. Now it was home. And USC, I thought USC had them 2 in the power rankings because of what they did against LSU. But, as it turns out, I don't think LSU is any great shakes. Watching LSU a little bit. So, but Troy, they're going to drop this week. Their defense has always been the question mark over the last few years. But I think they'll still be in the mix. I mean, they went to Michigan. And, Michigan's down, but it's not the easiest place to play. So I think USC will be there. Penn State, now they're playing no one, but either was Ohio State. So they did what they had to do.
Kent State might be the worst. I think they're the worst team in the country. They are the worst team. I mean,
okay, but they did. All I said was they did what they had to do. It's not right. I mean, it was 56 zip.
I mean, Akron is sort of in contention with Kent State.
Right. So,
sorry, the Akron area is not exactly a.
Well, Akron
schools are just miles apart.
Akron Hoban might be the best team of the 3 there.
Jeez.
Yeah, I would say Northwest Ohio has produced the better the MAC production this year.
Yeah, although
Toledo lost yesterday.
I know.
They still won a Mississippi State.
And Mississippi State got drilled by.
I tell you, who's pretty good. Bowling Green.
Yeah, they gave
Penn State all they wanted, and then they
Texas
played.
A&M.
Yeah, A&M they gave a game to. So that Toledo Bowling Green game will be one to watch.
I will
Please
say
tell me they didn't already. Please tell me they didn't already play.
No, they haven't already played.
Yeah, the Battle of I-75. To me, the interesting part of USC Michigan was I'm not sure how I should feel about Michigan's long-term outlook with Alex Orji as their quarterback. They were certainly one-dimensional in the second half, and to win the game, they almost exclusively had to run the ball in the second half and on their final drive, and they benefited from a pick six as well. But hey, that's tomorrow's problem. Michigan won the game, and it gives them some signs of life, and they're figuring things out. Maybe Donovan Edwards may no longer be their primary running back. So to me, if Michigan had suffered 2 losses in September, you just wonder where that team goes. Do they get in a hole early? Do they shut down? What's the mood like in the locker room? But to win gives them sort of a longer runway to sort through and work through stuff, because it's a long way to go to the end of November. And I think the fact that Michigan winning just kind of keeps them alive a little more in this Big Ten race.
Yeah, I think Colin Mullins was, I mean, he looks definitely better than Edwards, who had a costly fumble in that game. And that run that set up the game-winning touchdown was a terrific run. I mean, the USC guy had him wrapped up, and he just fought his way out of it and went another 30, 40 yards. And that was the game. That was the game, because they were not going to throw the ball. They needed USC to become the USC of old on defense and miss tackles, and that's what happened. But that Mullins run saved their season. I mean, that was a terrific run. But I agree with you, Joey. In this day and age, I don't think you can win consistently if you can't throw. You just can't. Teams will just stack the line of scrimmage, and if they fall behind 14, 20 points, they have no chance to catch up because they just can't throw the ball.
That's true. But who does Michigan have left, though?
I'm actually just
aren't they through? Aren't they
still have a tough schedule?
I think they're through the meat of it. And just Bill's going to check that. But Ohio State catches a little bit of a break. I can't believe I'm saying this. Not that an upset would happen, but Ohio State does not play Illinois. And Brett Bielema, I think, is at this moment coach of the year in the league, I would say. At Illinois.
Okay, here's Michigan. They play Minnesota.
Yeah,
Minnesota got drilled by Iowa yesterday. Washington, which is rebuilding completely.
Where's the game?
The game is at Washington, so
Yeah.
Then they do play at Illinois. That suddenly becomes a big game.
That's
October
a big
19th.
game. Yep.
Then Michigan, then they play Oregon, and they got to play at Indiana, which we'll see about the Hoosiers. I mean, they're 4-0, but the jury's still out, as it always is with Indiana, right? I mean, does anyone truly believe in Indiana? I mean, their coach is a guy who's
Kirk again. He certainly does.
Yeah, and they play Northwestern before Ohio State. So
the Oregon game.
No, not all gimmies. There's definitely not all gimmies.
No, I mean they certainly can lose to Washington, to Illinois. Yeah, Michigan State's always a weird one, right? But it's a rivalry game. I mean, Oregon, that there'll be underdogs in that game. At Indiana, Indiana might have a chance in that one. And then, of course, the big one. So they've gotten through. They lost, obviously, to Texas, and they beat USC. There were like 5 games that everyone knew were going to be tough games for them, and they're split the first 2.
They're a playoff
it's
team.
really good, but
they're a potential playoff team. If they split Ohio State and Oregon, they're going to be a 2-loss team with wins over USC and Oregon or Ohio State. I mean, that's why I think yesterday's game mattered so much for them, is it sort of keeps them truly in the thick. It keeps their locker room.
Totally agree with that. What about Penn State? I mean, I know I don't know their schedule, and when I have to go through every team.
They play at USC in October.
No, that's a big one.
Yeah,
so that'll be a tasty helmet game.
Yeah. Other than that, though, they have a pretty soft schedule. They play Illinois next week. That'll be an interesting one, right? Illinois next week, 7:30, same time.
On the road or home?
Home. Then UCLA at USC, at Wisconsin, lost their quarterback.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ohio State, home against Washington, at Purdue. Should win that one. At Minnesota. I mean, at Maryland or versus Maryland, home against Maryland. I mean, Penn State should make the playoff this year. I mean, if you figure that a two-loss Penn State team is going to make the playoff, if they don't make the playoff, it's been a major disappointment, and you have to call into question James Franklin's future there.
Well, it depends who they lose. It depends who they lose to. It always depends. Like if you lose to Purdue, you know,
they have three tough ones: Illinois, Ohio State, and USC. Only one on the road. USC is on the road. So
yeah, they're set up pretty nicely.
They're set up pretty nicely. But other than that, you look at the Big Ten and you go, ugh, right? I mean, who's
Nebraska? I mean, Nebraska can be a threat. I mean, they lost.
I know, but they got to prove they can win a close one. They can't win.
No, they never can. Games. But I'm just saying, a team that let's go back to Iowa and Purdue shocking Ohio State. I mean, you would have said of those teams, no way. Now Iowa was okay. Purdue kind of came out of nowhere. They had
Purdue that was not. I remember going into that game, and I think Ohio State was maybe an 11-point favorite, and thinking it was a trap game. They just come off.
I'm just saying. Win. On the surface, those teams that year, you would not have. I mean, maybe they're not Rutgers.
I'll tell you what, Rutgers is. I mean, Seattle's got to go in there. Do I think
they won in Blacksburg? They won in Blacksburg. That's
right.
not easy. Anyhow, so Ohio State still obviously team to beat. Challenging schedule. You got Penn State at Oregon.
Right.
Right. And Michigan.
Nebraska might be interesting. Yeah. I mean, Nebraska is clearly improved. I mean, they are better. I watched that game, and that was a 50-50 game. It's just they constantly lose those 50-50 games somehow.
And last thing, looking at 2 weeks, I don't see Iowa. I mean, Iowa has a decent defense, but that offense, Ohio State will not fold against Iowa's offense. Iowa will be lucky to score 14 points, I think, in that game.
At least there'll be a test. I mean, I don't know that Michigan State is going to be much of a test. Michigan State is better than we've seen so far, than the opponents Ohio State has seen so far, but only marginally. I mean, if it's a game in the second half, I'll be surprised. And then Iowa has got a good defense, but we've said all along, October 12th is when Ohio State season really starts.
Yeah, I would only throw this out, Michigan State. For the young guys on Ohio State, first road game, that can sometimes throw you a little off. It changes up the routine a little bit. I'm not saying it will, but that's the only little, element to that game. Michigan State going into the season, I thought it was dead last in the Big Ten and beat Maryland on the road. So I mean, Michigan State it would be a monster upset, but there are some elements in play.
They are well coached. Jonathan Smith from Oregon State used to be the play caller at Washington when they made the playoff under Chris Peterson. I mean, they know what they're doing. They just but
in year one,
rebuild situation.
The
roster is what it is,
right?
But they'll be prepared. That just about does it on this edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. Thanks for joining us and listening to us break down Ohio State's win over Marshall and taking a swing through the rest of the Big Ten. We'll be back later this week to preview Ohio State, Michigan State in a little more detail. Thanks for dropping by and visit us throughout the week at dispatch.com.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.